So this is part 2 of me covering every single playoff team in the NBA and what I think they're going to do in the upcoming postseason. In the last video, we covered the Eastern Conference, so if you want to know what I think about the East, go check that out. But today we're going to be covering the West. Hello everybody, welcome to Oscar Rusty Bucket. Subscribe to the channel if you have not already and drop a like on this video. It only takes 1 second and it makes a massive difference in how this video performs in the YouTube algorithm. Also, go check out yesterday's podcast with Nicholas Henkel, who is the editor of this channel and also hosts the Coping Hour podcast. It was a good time, so presumably I'm recording this ahead of time. I think it was a good time, probably. But go check that out. Link will be in the description. So just like last time, we're going to quickly talk about a couple of teams that really just do not have any shot of being in any kind of playoff consideration, those being the Spurs, Blazers, Grizzlies. I can also say the Rockets and Jazz are probably in that category, as there's a decent stretch of wins between them and everybody else. But yeah, I mean, all of these teams are just not quite there yet. The Rockets and Jazz have managed to be competitive, and the Grizzlies, for what it's worth, have been more competitive than you would expect for how terrible their luck has been this year, but nevertheless, far from a playoff contender. So we're just going to jump immediately into the C tier, of which there's actually a decent amount of teams. The Western Conference was a lot harder to actually label than the Eastern Conference, so forgive me a little bit if these are a little bit janky, but this is just my honest opinions of these teams and their ability to perform in a postseason. So in the C tier, we have the Pelicans, Warriors, Kings, and Lakers. First of all, the Lakers and Warriors have been in kind of a similar boat this last year of just old team with a legendary player that we'd like to see be better, being exactly not that, mostly because they're sticking to their guns when their guns clearly are not fucking working. At least in the case of the Lakers, they have a little bit more of an excuse for the rest of the roster just because the coach is the big problem, whereas even though Steve Kerr I don't think has been as great of a coach as he has been at times, isn't necessarily a huge hindrance. I just think the Warriors honestly just don't have enough talent, at least with Draymond and especially Klay Thompson and Andrew Wiggins declining. On the positive end for those teams, you know, the Lakers have LeBron and AD, and those are both like superstars, at least often. You know, I think AD is a little bit better than LeBron, but they kind of both have moments where they play like superstars. They're just not regularly playing on a superstar level all the time anymore, and if they did have that, then they would probably be a lot better of a team, but they really can't maintain that, especially LeBron at his age, AD with his injury stuff. I honestly feel good about this Lakers roster and a lot of things lately. It's really just Darvin Ham. Like, they might be a B tier contender to me if not for fucking Darvin Ham. D'Angelo Russell has been so much good lately. LeBron James has been better than he was last year. AD probably about the same, if not better than he was last year. Austin Reeves is about as good as he was last year, but they just have one of the worst coaches in the entire league. So it's rough. The Sacramento Kings are more or less the same team as last year. I could see them being a pretty difficult first round matchup, especially if everybody's really got it going. I know that last year versus the Warriors, right? Yeah, they played the Warriors. For the Warriors, it was a lack of experience that probably ultimately did them in, and they did actually have that series and get that experience, so that could help them in future endeavors. But frankly, I just think there's a couple of teams that are better than them. The New Orleans Pelicans have been better of late, and honestly, if there was any team that I would say could be a dark horse among this Western Conference, it would be the Pelicans. Zion has not been as impressive of like a finisher and scorer as you would like, but he has been more of a playmaker, and that's been a nice dynamic to New Orleans' offense. CJ McCollum is shooting like 45% from three. He's one of the most efficient scorers in the entire league, one of the best jump shooters in the entire league, a really solid third option. I think Brandon Ingram is a fairly underrated player, and he works really well next to Zion. Herb Jones is hitting his threes this year. Trey Murphy is a sniper. Like, there's a lot of things going in New Orleans' favor. Honestly, Jonas Valanciunas might be their weak link at this point, which he's a fine center. You're doing much worse at center if you're a lot of other NBA teams, but I also just don't know that his skill set's all that complimentary, especially to Zion Williamson specifically. But that said, I do like this Pelicans roster, and I do think they could surprise some people and maybe even pull off an upset. Who knows? Moving up to the B tier, we have the Timberwolves, the Suns, and the Mavericks. These are some teams that I don't think are quite going to cut it as contenders, but are, you know, knocking on the door there. Now, I understand that the Dallas Mavericks are actually placed a few seeds under, I believe it's the Pelicans and the Kings. As of late, they've struggled a little bit after initially looking good after the trade deadline. They have since looked not so good. A lot of discussion about how they need to fire Jason Kidd, which is true. They do need to fire Jason Kidd, but that's probably not going to happen now. The reason I'm putting them in the B tier is the Luka factor. I think if you have Luka Doncic, regardless of how the rest of the roster is, I'm going to give you a chance to win a series, especially now that the second best player that you're getting is Kyrie Irving instead of a not as good as New York version and severely hindered Jalen Brunson. Dallas, I think if you have a player like Luka, you just have a chance in just about any playoff series. That said, not going to put them in a contender category in spite of how good Luka is, because the roster just ain't quite there, and they have one of the worst coaches in the league. The Phoenix Suns are a team that I have been critical of this entire year, and that's not stopping now. While I think Grayson Allen and Royce O'Neal make for some pretty damn solid role players for what they've got going on, and Yusuf Nurkic ended up being a lot better of a center option than I initially anticipated. At the end of the day, this team does not have the proper depth. They don't really have the proper playmaking either. The defense isn't good enough. I also just don't think that Devin Booker and Kevin Durant are as good as some people think. Devin Booker, not as much. Kevin Durant, definitely. The logic of just, we have Devin Booker and Kevin Durant, therefore we win, it doesn't work. I don't think those guys are good enough for that logic to actually apply. I don't even think that logic really applies in the NBA anymore, period, unless we just had a ridiculous combination of talent. But as of right now, those two just aren't enough that, you know, them plus 3 good role players is going to win you conference finals. It's just not. And as for the Minnesota Timberwolves, the Timberwolves, I was very conflicted on whether or not this was a contender, because I think if everybody is healthy and everything is set to go in the postseason, then you could conceivably view them as a contender. I think a lot of it hinges on Anthony Edwards and how much he's able to elevate his game in the postseason. Last year versus Denver, he had an excellent series against them, so it's definitely something that he is capable of doing, as he's done it before. But, you know, who's to say that he replicates that, or who's to say that he doesn't outperform it? We can't really, you know, predict the future like that. But Cat being out, their offense being mid, objectively a very mediocre NBA offense. Their defense is great, and I expect their defense to hold up in the postseason, unlike, you know, Rudy Gobert-led defenses of the past, because they have some really good point of attack defenders. And obviously, this is a team that last year gave Denver more problems than really anybody else did. So they're capable of being very good in the postseason. I just feel like with the Cat injury, I'm gonna put them just outside of A tier, but they could conceivably be there. Just a little bit of an asterisk there, I guess. So that leaves us with 3 contenders in the Western Conference. As I explained in the East video, if you did not watch that, I have 2 tiers of contenders pretty much always in my head. There's the tier 1, which are teams that are pretty much unquestionably absolutely can win a championship, and a tier 2 where I think that's definitely possible, but it's not going to be an easy route, and there's just some teams that are simply going to be above them. So with that said, in the A tier, I have the Oklahoma City Thunder standing alone. I have them as not quite a runaway contender, just purely based on inexperience. I do also worry about their size, dependent on the matchup that they would get. Chet is great, but after that, they really do not have any big bodies in any capacity. They could use bigger wings, and they just don't have that. That said, they're absolutely a contender, and they absolutely could win the West. I'm just going to bank on some teams with a little bit more experience, and that's why in the S tier, I have the Denver Nuggets and the Los Angeles Clippers. The Clippers, ever since getting James Harden, well, after their 5-game losing streak. After that happened, they have been fucking great. one of the best teams in the entire NBA. And really, the big gripe that I have always had with the Los Angeles Clippers is they haven't had the playmaking, and because they haven't had the playmaking, they've always been one of the worst teams in the league in terms of shot selection. That has changed with James Harden. They now are generating great looks all the time. James brings a dynamic to that offense that just simply results in better shots regularly. Yeah, it's just a harder team to deal with. There's so much talent here. The Clippers are really good. They're personally, if I had to rank teams that are going to win the title, they would come third for me, but I think they're very much solidly in the contender class, and they're really the only team in the Western Conference that I think Denver should be fearful of. And Denver is obviously an S tier for obvious reasons. They are the defending champions, and their roster is, not at least notably worse than it was last year. Obviously, the loss of Bruce Brown is huge, but I think Peyton Watson has stepped up enough to where you can bridge those gaps with just talent from your starters again. I don't think it's really going to be too big of a problem for the Nuggets. They're the team that I expect to win that conference. I'm predicting a Nuggets versus Celtics NBA Finals, but I wouldn't be surprised if we got a Clippers Celtics. That would be my next pick. That is it. Shout out to Nick for editing this video. Again, go check out that podcast. Link will be in the description, but that is it. Goodbye.